Welcome to Civic Warriors, brought to you by Witham. On this podcast, we bring the conversation to you, sharing engaging stories that motivate and build consensus in the nonprofit community. This podcast is about the innovators, the leaders on the front lines of adversity, guiding lights in the nonprofit industry affecting change. And through their stories, we can all join forces to become Civic Warriors. Hey Warriors, welcome to today's episode of Civic Warriors, brought to you by Witham. I'm your host, Brad Caruso, leader of Witham's not-for-profit practice. Today's guest is Steve Maislin, President and CEO of Greater Houston Community Foundation. Under Steve's leadership, the Community Foundation has become a driving force for impactful philanthropy in the region, with a mission to grow effective giving by connecting donors to the causes they care about, stewarding charitable assets with excellence, and convening resources to address critical community needs. The Community Foundation plays a vital role in shaping a stronger Houston. Community foundations like Greater Houston Community Foundation serve as cornerstones in communities across the country, providing trusted guidance and infrastructure to maximize charitable impact. Today, we're excited to speak with Steve about the unique role community foundations play, the evolving landscape of philanthropy, and how Greater Houston Community Foundation is inspiring meaningful change for Houston and beyond. We're really excited to talk to you, Steve, today. And with that, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
So just to get started, I always like to hear a little bit about our guests that are on. And maybe, Steve, can you provide a little bit of background of how you got involved with the Community Foundation?
Sure, absolutely. Before coming here, I was an estate planning attorney for almost 20 years, I guess. And this opportunity arose to take that background, my tax background, my connection with the advisor community, and move into the Community Foundation field, which has been incredibly satisfying over the last 24 years to help our donors of all different types, really drive impact and help amplify it and make a really positive impact on the Greater Houston community. So it was kind of a win-win for me to take all of that technical knowledge, my love for the community, be able to work with this great team here and with our fantastic donors. So been here 24 years and still enjoying it.
It's an interesting career shift to go from an attorney to leading a nonprofit, if you think about it that way. But I guess there are a significant amount of synergies between what you were doing and what you're doing now. And now it's marrying the two of those together.
Absolutely. Not least, we get a lot of introductions to new donors from the professional advisor community. And of course, I knew and do know an awful lot of those folks. And I still get to use my technical background, but I get to run a business and work with some great folks here. And as I say, our donor community is just fantastic.
Love it. So one of the topics we want to talk about today and just giving our listeners out there, a better understanding of is essentially what is a community foundation. So, one thing I want to delve into a little bit is community foundations as an entity, and then more specifically, the Greater Houston Community Foundation. But in your words, what is the purpose of a community foundation? Why do they exist?
Sure. So community foundations have been around since 1914. So it appears to be a concept that's got some legitimacy. It's going to stick around for a while. And our focus is on the local community. So we work with donors of all types, individuals and families, businesses, foundations, and we, in effect, pull their funds together in a sense. We can talk about the technical aspects, but it gets aggregated and invested not only locally, but for most of us, most community foundations all over the country, some cases internationally. But it's all about, driving impact, making philanthropy easy for our donors. And we can do things. Some things are very simple. Some are complex. But we're a public charitable foundation. So we're a 501c3. And so when folks make donations here, they get the best possible deductions, however that applies to their situation. And for almost all of our donors, they're supporting the local community, but also causes around the country. And I think that's pretty typical at the Community Foundation field. There's about 900 community foundations of one type or another right now in this country.
That's a lot. Yeah. And in my travels, just, leading a nonprofit group here. And, most people don't differentiate or aren't really, haven't really delved into what a community foundation does. I mean, I think it gets conflated with a lot of other type of giving type organizations, because there's obviously many, many purposes that you serve that we're going to get into about how you help your community. And I guess if you delve into it, maybe give us a little history on the Greater Houston Community Foundation. Maybe talk a little bit about your organization's history a little further and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Sure, absolutely. So we're one of the younger community foundations, certainly when you look at major cities around the country. We were actually created in 1971 under what we then called our Chamber of Commerce. It's now called the Greater Houston Partnership. But kind of an interesting background in that we were housed in-house there and used as a special purpose entity but did not become what you'd think of as a typical community foundation until we were spun off into an independent entity and basically went live in 1995. And since that time, we've grown into one of the 25 largest community foundations in the country. And what we're most proud of, I think, is that our donors are put us in the top 10 in terms of grants out into the community. They've given out over $2.5 billion in that relatively short history. We have, like most community foundations, we have a community-based board here and a professional staff that works with our donors to meet them where they are, whether they want a donor advised fund, which we can talk more about, or a scholarship fund, or they want to do, collaborative giving. A community foundation is really a vehicle to make philanthropy easy and impactful for donors of all types within their local community. And that's certainly what we aspire to here in Houston.
Yeah, that's an incredible giving number. To give out $2.4 billion in 30 years is an incredible amount of assistance being provided. And going from, as you said, a smaller organization in those terms back in 1995 all the way to today, where, as you mentioned, you're one of the largest community foundations out there. That's no easy feat. And especially, we know how difficult it is to manage the landscape of the not-for-profit community today with everything going on in the world. And, it's incredible that you've been able to provide that as support and that assistance. And definitely want to get into a little further with you and hear from your words about some of the different ways that your organization helps. And on that topic, just more specifically, one of the biggest areas that you hear people in our industry talk about a lot is DAFs. People hear the word DAF, and a lot of people don't know what it means. A lot of people don't know why a DAF exists, or what it means in the context of a larger organization. People think a DAF is an organization, but the reality is it's a mechanism. So let's get into that a little bit. In your words, how would you define a donor advised fund?
Sure. So a donor advised fund is at the base level, it's a charitable giving vehicle. It's something like almost like a charitable investment account, if you will. And the original donor sets up the fund. A real common scenario would be mom and dad set up a fund, and they're the advisors to the fund. They make a donation into that fund. That's a donation to a public charity. So it can be cash, but tax-wise, it's more effective to use an appreciated asset, because when that asset gets sold, there's no capital gains tax. The money gets invested and grows tax-free, and then the advisors to the fund recommend grants out to typically public charities in the local community all over the country. For some organizations like ours, we can facilitate international giving. So the tool has grown so rapidly, I think, for a number of reasons. It's very easy to set up. It's a cost-effective mechanism. People have, effective control in the sense of being able to make grant recommendations, if you will. And donor-advised funds can be small and simple, and they can be gigantic and complex, and everything in between.
Totally understand that. And I think one of those benefits that exists for individual donors that often gets overlooked is, you get the tax deduction for the donation when you make it, even though you're going to make grants in the future. And also, there are the tax planning considerations, like you mentioned, of donating appreciated property and things like that. So certainly there's a lot of benefit to the donor. But then also, I imagine with this concept as well, existing at a community foundation, what are some of those other benefits you get? I create as you mentioned, a DAF, and there's all layers of complexity of what that can look like. How does that exist at a community foundation?
Well, first of all, the benefit of coming to a community foundation to set up a donor advised fund is there's a multitude of benefits, if you will. We offer, really good service for people, and, we're very responsive. I think a lot of fund sponsors would say that. But beyond that, we have a deep expertise in both philanthropy and the local community. And so when people want us to engage with their planning team on their estate planning and their legacy and what have you, we're really well positioned to do that, and a local resource for them. But then beyond that, many donors want advice about how to have impact in the local community. So I've been here a long time. I've never had a donor walk in the door and say, I have no idea what I'm interested in. But every week we have donors walk in the door and go, I am passionate about homelessness, food insecurity, the arts. And I know a certain number of organizations, but either I would like to understand more of the local landscape, who are the most effective organizations, or I would like to collaborate with other donors and move the needle on some of the bigger issues. So there's a really unique aspect to coming to a community foundation. And also, I would say, for us, one of the things we're really proud of is we have for years now had a Center for Family Philanthropy and a Next Gen Donor Institute. And that's becoming ever more important with the wealth transfer going on now, that we for 12 years have been working with the next generation of donors. And these are folks who are going to steward huge amounts of philanthropic wealth and a lot of times don't have a background in philanthropy. And so we think that's a real value add to our donors and to the community. And you're starting to see that grow within the community foundation field.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And just that concept of efficiency and effectiveness. You mentioned a couple of things in there of how, the organization can be efficient about giving, because obviously sometimes there's some hurdles, whether it's local or international or other types of giving. But then also the effectiveness of giving. You're in this community, you care about something, you want to support that something. We can help you find out or hone in that strategy that you're trying to employ and look, not just short-term one-time gifts, but also long-term, how we can maximize your gifts. I think, those are definitely some extreme benefits. And obviously you being local to the community, I think you mentioned it before, and very common in the community foundation world is that your board is local to the community. So, the word community in your name is very, very important, because that's one of your driving missions, is bolstering that community, bolstering the charities in your community, and enhancing the gifts and making them as effective as possible. So yeah, I've always found it really cool how community foundations are able to do that. And like you said, serve such a vital role in making that happen.
Yeah, we provide an extensive amount of learning opportunities for donors, to come together to learn about what's going on in the community, what are the greatest needs. We actually have a data indicators project in-house here, which is not common in the field, but certainly not unique, so that folks can go online. We call it Understanding Houston, and they can see, what's happening broadly, what the needs are, where the city is knocking it out of the park and where some of the challenges are, and where they may want to direct some of their philanthropy as a result. And that's a resource that our donors use, the foundation community uses. So that's an example of something where we're giving back to the community more broadly than just the donors who are engaged here.
Love that. I've heard this term too used in the community foundation world and in other, circles I go to. And I've heard the term strategic philanthropy. And one of the benefits of the community foundation is assisting with that. How do you define strategic philanthropy, and how does you, as the Greater Houston Community Foundation, support donors in making kind of intentional, high-impact giving decisions?
The way we think about strategic philanthropy is it's all about impact and amplifying impact. And, it's not unlike investing in other ways. You want to get the greatest result for the money that you are investing in. In order to do strategic philanthropy, it helps a lot to know who are the most impactful nonprofits, what the needs are of the community, systems change, ideas, all of that, which our knowledgeable staff can bring to the table. So in the typical interaction with donors, they are blessed with financial resources and a real desire to help the community. And they look to us for our expertise in helping them take their passions and utilize that to have real impact. We have a big donor here who always talks to me about the fact that everybody makes their money using their head and they give it away with their heart. And really impactful philanthropists give their money away with their head and their heart. And we're here to help on the head side and also to make it easy. We work with a lot of people. I'm a tax lawyer. I love the complexity of the structure. A lot of our donors love the fact that they can do it really easily. Go online, make a grant, reach out to our staff, ask a quick question. So we try and be there kind of across the spectrum for our donors. And it's a fascinating job because the passion of our donors, and I think this is typical in community foundations, just covers the spectrum all over the place.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I love the education component. I mean, that's big in my travels in the not-for-profit industry. I always find education, awareness, and having someone that you can lean on to really coach you into helping in this area. I've always found that that's a big part of what we do. And, the really interesting part that I always find too, just working with community foundations, is you have both sides of the coin. You have the donors that are coming in, and then you have your connections to the nonprofits in your community on the other side, and you develop those connections over time. How does the community foundation on the other side of that coin partner and work with other nonprofits in your community? How do you connect? How do you go about that? How do you work with, and as you said, you develop these relationships with different charitable organizations to effectively give. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a broad question.
Very broad
because
question.
It happens in a lot of different ways. So I'll give you a couple of very tangible examples. Sure. One thing we're really proud of that is a relatively new strategic partnership for us is a couple of years ago, we launched the Greater Houston Disaster Alliance. And that's in partnership with our local United Way, the United Way of Greater Houston. And it's been a terrific partnership because we bring the strength of the two organizations together. We each have deep expertise. One of the more interesting things I've experienced here is that we were the back office for President Bush, George H.W. Bush, when they did all the Bush-Clinton charitable funds like the Katrina Fund. And United Way similarly has deep expertise. Now we've launched this partnership, and when that money comes in, it gets deployed into the local nonprofit community. So we are proactive in building a network because when you do disaster relief work, speed is incredibly important. So that's an example right there. Beyond that, we engage with our donors through offering access to and working with them on the Understanding Houston data project that I mentioned, which is also a partnership with the Kinder Institute at Rice University. There's another strategic partnership. We serve very much as the connective tissue, if you will, in the donor community and the nonprofit community. And so partnerships like that are really valuable, I think, to the community as well as to our donors. And then beyond that, we're always reaching out to nonprofits and representing our donors. We'll have a donor come in and say, I really want to make a unique impact on nonprofits servicing veterans. And can you, figure out what that is, pull those groups together, what have you. And so that happens on an opportunity by opportunity basis, if you will.
Yeah, a couple of things you said there that I love is developing partnerships. It's a big part of what we do, a big part of what you do. And especially, one of the other concepts in the giving world, like you said, is kind of like the speed of giving. And for those that have lived through natural disasters or certain types of disaster recovery work, you know that the speed of giving is integrally important. And we've had a few people on the podcast in the past talk about how they go about doing that. So I love hearing that because, sometimes government resources and other resources, they're not there in that timely amount of manner that's needed. And it's wonderful that you've partnered with a lot of local organizations to make it easy for people to give, and then you can deploy it quickly to those places where they need to go. So, certainly I'm a first responder in my outside of Witham life. So I certainly value and appreciate. I'm usually the guy with the helmet on in the middle of the rain. So
there you go. And I got to say, we're blessed. You talked about the large amount of grants we've made in our relatively short history. That's reflective of our community. We have this really generous community. And when you look at the disaster work, individuals and families step up, but I also got to give real plaudits to our business community, the original investment we had to launch, and they step up in, disaster after disaster to, help get us going. And so it's really nice to be involved with a community foundation in a community like Houston, quite honestly.
Without a doubt. Yeah, no, happy to hear that. And certainly it's an awesome place to be. We talked a little bit about how people give, about you partnering in the community. Can you talk a little more about some of the causes you support or some of the grants you make, and maybe some examples about some folks you've helped? I always like hearing about the impact.
Sure. So first of all, Greater Houston is a little bit unusual, and I think it has a lot to do with our youth in that almost all of our grant making, and we gave out, over $270 million last year, are donor-advised grants. So that means that we are working with our donors, but the donors are ultimately making the decision of where to invest. And so that drives some of the impact. Now, we have launched a community impact initiative, which is creating an opportunity for donors to come together and collaborate on giving. Last year, we gave out $500,000. It's a very early pilot project, but we hope to grow that where donors can come together, learn together, and drive more impact by giving together as well. Beyond that, we offer a wide range of tools. So one of the areas where I think we see the most impact, and responsive to your question, is in our scholarship area, which has grown hugely over the last few years. We give out over almost $6 million a year now in grants. People love the scholarship piece because it's so tangible. They can see the benefit. And we've developed a real expertise in helping individuals, foundations, and businesses design scholarships so they're, as effective as possible. And it's a really impactful form of philanthropy. So that's, another example of that. And then our donors, it's fascinating to see, their focal point. We have some donors who are very focused on food insecurity, as an example. And so they have not only given to the local food bank, but they'll reach out to smaller organizations further out geographically into the community, as an example. And so the impact is really kind of all over the place with our donors, and we're there to support them. And again, as I mentioned before, everybody comes in the door with a passion, and some want to exercise that by themselves, and some want to be in a room with others who feel that way. And we try and meet everybody where they are.
Love it. And on the topic of scholarships, because it's another area of impact that you're making. You said that you've had a significant uptick. What drove that significant uptick in scholarships? Was that just organizational philosophy from your perspective? Was that an external need that you noticed? What kind of, from your perspective, drove your increase in scholarship giving, or what got it to, I think you said you give out about $6 million a year, which is it's a big number. What drove that?
We saw a real need, a real interest in the marketplace in doing more and more scholarship giving. And so over time, we built up a really strong scholarship team. We can sit down with people and talk about best practices and, what works and what doesn't. We can connect with institutions. And education is one of the biggest areas that our donors give into, not surprisingly. And obviously, that's an aspect of the education philanthropy. So it's not at all unusual to have a family that sets up a large donor advised fund here. They're giving into charter schools, they're supporting something in public education, and they're doing scholarships. And so it all just fits together well. So it was really responsive to the marketplace, but we also see it as very much mission driven, because obviously education is one of the keys to having a successful community over time. And, that's part of the reason we're here.
Love it. Yeah. And that's, as you keep saying, the reinvestment in the community. I mean, that's just another layer, another element of your reinvestment into that community, and creates more people connected to you, which is awesome for the future.
Exactly. No, that it's helped us build some great relationships on the nonprofit side, but also with donors and with foundations also.
Love it. On the grant making side, is there anything that a community foundation can't do? A lot of the questions that we get sometimes is, can I do this? Can I do that? Are there things that community foundations, let's say on the grant making side, can't do, stay away from, or need to just be cautious of that? If someone's saying, hey, I'm curious about a donor advised fund, or I'm curious about doing this, what are some of those do's and don'ts? Any advice to them that you would give, or anything that jumps out to mind on that topic?
I guess I would answer that in two parts. One is the typical grants are going to public charities that are in good standing. Whether they're here locally or all over the country, and community foundations, almost without exception, as far as I know, can make grants all over the United States. And as I mentioned before, we facilitate international grants, not surprising given the international nature of our community. But I know we're not unique in that regard among the community foundation field. So that's kind of the typical course. But I would also say that we get involved from time to time with really unique opportunities. So I would say to people, if you have an idea that's really special or unique or what have you, talk to your local community foundation. I'll give you an example. We had a donor a few years ago who really wanted to fund a series of videos around childhood obesity. Well, there were no nonprofit movie studios to help produce this and what have you, but we were able to set up a structure such that we were able to use a for-profit studio, but there was no private benefit. Any profit coming off of that or what have you came back into a fund here and went out into the charitable world. So our donor got the deduction. The community got the benefit of this really impactful set of videos, if you will. So there's a lot of creative ideas. And it always starts with I'm always amazed at how creative our donors are in walking in the door and asking a question, not having the professional expertise, but knowing what they want to achieve. And it's our job to see if we can get to yes.
And that's a benefit of having a tax attorney as the leader of an organization.
That comes across every now and then.
Every once in a while, someone asks you a structuring question. You're like, actually, I have some experience with this.
I love it when I can say that.
Yeah, that's always a win. As I was planning for this, I saw some things on your website that it's your 30th anniversary year. And we said in the beginning, you started in 1995. You've been at this as an organization for 30 years. As you as the leader of the organization and reflecting on that, what do you view as your most notable accomplishments?
Well, I think the grant number and how active our donors are is always something that makes us really proud and thankful to our donors, because, the giving percentage here, you always hear about a private foundation has to give out a minimum of 5% of the value of his assets a year. Our donors give out typically north of 20%. And so we're really proud of the fact that money is out there, and about half of it stays in Greater Houston, 2/3 in the state. So it's having a lot of local impact while also going beyond that. But beyond that, we're really proud of our disaster recovery work. Unfortunately, this community gets to exercise that muscle on a fairly regular basis, not only because of hurricanes, but largely in that vein. We talked about the scholarship work, and I'm really excited about our next gen work that we do through our Center for Family Philanthropy and our Donor Institute, because, we've been talking about this great transfer of wealth for, 20 years or something, but we are now absolutely in the midst of it happening, and helping that next generation have the knowledge base, the resources to deploy those assets in an impactful way, we see as really mission focused for us. So I think we're really proud about that part as well.
I'm actually curious, just based on that too, with your Next Gen Donor Institute and Next Gen kind of this concept. Can you talk a little bit more about that program?
Sure. So our program historically has been targeted at folks who are about age 25 to 40, but that's broadened out some. Beyond that, it's evolved over time where it is now done typically over a couple weekends because so many of the Next Gen live in other towns. Post-pandemic, we've done a lot of virtual training in that regard. Certainly, our donors' children come in and get involved in the Next Gen Donor Institute. But beyond that, we have advisors who refer people to us. It's a great vehicle that's not only a win for the community when people get educated, but it builds, quite frankly, relationships for us with new donors. And it's kind of interesting. 10 years ago, every fund that came out of that was mom and dad opening a fund for the kids. Now it's real common. And when I say kids, these are adults, many of whom have become their own wealth creators. They come in, they open a fund, and now they're bringing mom and dad to the community foundation and saying, as a family, we have a shared set of values and we ought to take that into our giving. And we have a very experienced staff. We actually had, I think it was last year, we had an academic study done of the work that we've done. And it was really interesting to see, we're doing some things really well, but there's some other ways we could be more impactful. And when you've been doing it that long and it gets some sustainability, there's a huge benefit to that because you learn over time what's working, what's not. A lot of the folks who engage with that are very time constrained. So this idea of either virtual or doing it over a couple of weekends has made it much more palatable. We've had brothers and sisters, a lot of married couples come in and do it. And it's, we talk about everything from, how do you develop a giving plan? What's social giving versus trying to be more impactful, to how do you identify a great nonprofit, to the one that I always find fascinating because so many of these younger folks come from very prominent families. They always want to know how to say no in a gracious way because they're getting asked all the time. And sometimes people forget mom and dad have a lot more resources than they do at this stage and they can't fund everything. So it's been I think it's been a real win for the folks who go through it, for the Community Foundation and for the community.
There's a lot of value in that education. And you're right. Like you're selling me on wanting to learn a little bit more as well. Cause I just, that's not anything that anybody really teaches. And you're right, especially in the examples that you gave. Saying no graciously is actually a very hard thing to do. Learning how to identify, a sustainable and a strong nonprofit is not easy to do. There's so many out there. There's so many organizations that hey, they're good causes. They do a lot of good, but how do you narrow that down to where you actually want to give? And the flexibility of your program, I guarantee is highly relevant and makes it very lucrative to a lot of people. That definitely is important, especially with the next generation of folks out there.
And it's also people begin to understand where their interests are. Some people are really excited about startup nonprofits that very well may fail, just like a startup in the for-profit world. But if it takes off and it's in an area they care about, that's really catalytical. And other folks want, proven nonprofits. They want to see the specific ROI. And we have seen a real shift in younger donors who grew up with technology and an iPhone or, an Android in their hand. They're used to seeing a whole lot of data, and they're not really as loyal institutionally. They want to see what the impact is, which I think probably in the long run is a real win for philanthropy, even though it's going to take some adapting for all of us.
Without a doubt. Yeah. No, we're definitely all learning as we go. Certainly. How can the public help you?
Clearly, the thing we would love most is for them to come visit with us. We have a really skilled team of philanthropy advisors. And we welcome those conversations. And like any other business, for-profit or not-for-profit, we're not the solution for everybody, but we love those conversations. And a lot of times we can fit really well. It may be a donor-advised fund, it may be a scholarship fund, but it may be starting by training in the Next Gen Donor Institute, or we may not be a fit. Every now and then, for example, someone comes in the door and says, I want to start a scholarship fund for the local law school that I graduated from. Well, they should go do it there because if it's a single institution, they're going to do it for free. They know the institution, and we'll tell them that. You know, at the end of the day, we're a philanthropic resource. We love having donors. We want to grow, but we certainly want to help the community. So the number one thing is that people could pick up the phone and come to visit with us. And we're always looking for knowledge of new things that are going on in the community, and they can, you know, reach out and educate us in that regard about that. We've also launched our new Community Impact Fund that I'd mentioned before, where we're creating a collaborative giving vehicle. And so for some folks who may not want to go down the path of a full fund and what have you, but engage in some of that work, they might want to reach out and learn about that. It's focused on economic mobility, which is a broad topic, but hugely important in a community that's relatively young like Houston, very diverse, a lot of interesting both challenges and opportunities. So I guess at the end of the day, the bottom line response to that is let's talk. Let's have some communication and see where there's some commonality and we can help. Or if not, again, being the connector, we can make some introductions.
Awesome. And the best way to reach out, website?
Probably the website, and, you know, sending an email our way and you'll hear back from us. People can always call the main phone number, but the website, and in our experience today, that seems to be the way most people reach out and connect. I don't know about you, but my phone rings a lot less than it used to. I get a lot more email. I get texts in a big way now. And I think that's how, it's becoming more and more common for people to reach out and start the dialogue that way.
Well, without a doubt. Yeah. I was reading a book the other day, and one of the things that it said was when they're in the interview process, the one thing they started doing is they'll send a text message from their phone and be like, hey, we had a great interview. We had a question for you. And they ask them and see how fast they respond to it or see how they respond to it. And, it's both a way to connect with people because people are going to read the text before they read an email or a phone call, but also a way to say, like, how responsive is this person? But text message, without a doubt, is the number one way to go about doing that. And I've even noticed that in my profession, like, we don't have phones on our desks anymore. It's either a Zoom call or you text me, and that's it.
Exactly. I was going to say that one of the things I'm really proud of is our team is so responsive because people who work here care about the community, but donors figure that out. And so they text on a Saturday, and they're really surprised if they don't hear till Monday because that's unusual. People want to step up and help and move the dialogue along. And so that's where the world is moving, and that's where our donors are moving as well.
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. Awesome. I mean, this was a wonderful conversation about the Greater Houston Community Foundation, wonderful conversation about community foundations in general, and really just all the impact that you've had. I really hope, those that listen are, get a little value out of understanding what these organizations do. As mentioned, community foundations are in many communities out there in the United States, and certainly have the ability to help you with that. And certainly you're doing great for the world. So, from my perspective, really appreciate all that you do for your community as well as the greater giving world. Thank you so much for dedicating your time. I know everybody's busy, and I just really valued that you are a guest on the show and were able to share this knowledge. It was very much appreciated by us.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's really a privilege to work at a place like this, and I encourage people who aren't in Houston to reach out locally. It's pretty easy to find your community foundation, and it's a great place to have an interesting conversation about making a difference.
Love it. Love it. And Warriors out there, thank you for listening. Subscribe and meet us right back here for another episode of With Them Civic Warriors. Bye, everybody.